The bank manager looked up from the paperwork. Then, he frowned. He checked the screen again, looked at me, and quietly said, "Mr. Carter, there shouldn't be another beneficiary." For a second, I honestly thought he'd mixed up my file with someone else's. "My father only had 2 sons," I said, "me and my older brother." He didn't answer. Instead, he slowly turned the monitor away from himself. Not enough for me to read it, just enough for me to realize there was something on that screen he wasn't expecting me to see. The room suddenly felt smaller. My hands tightened around the folder I was holding so hard that the corners bent. 3 days earlier, we'd buried my father. Now a complete stranger was looking at me like my entire family had been built on a lie. And the strangest part? My brother had insisted I didn't need to come to the bank. Ryan told me he'd already handled everything. The estate, the insurance, Dad's accounts, the lawyer, even the mortgage paperwork. He kept saying the same sentence over and over. "Don't worry about it, I'll take care of everything." At the time, I thought he was trying to protect Mom, protect me. Now I wasn't so sure who he was protecting, because the bank manager hadn't made a mistake. He'd found something Ryan never mentioned, and judging by the look on his face, he wasn't supposed to find it either. The manager excused himself and disappeared into a back office. I sat there alone. The only sound was the soft hum of fluorescent lights. My phone buzzed. It was Ryan. Almost as if he knew exactly where I was. "Ryan, everything okay?" I stared at the screen. I hadn't told anyone I was coming here. Not Mom, not my wife, not even the attorney. So how did he know? I didn't answer. 30 seconds later, another text arrived. "Call me before you sign anything." I hadn't said a word about signing documents. A cold knot settled in my stomach. That wasn't concern. That sounded like someone trying to stay one step ahead. The bank manager returned. But he wasn't alone. A woman in a navy blazer walked in carrying a thick leather portfolio. She introduced herself calmly. "I'm Sarah Whitmore. I specialize in probate matters." "Probate? Why would a probate attorney be at the bank?" She sat across from me and carefully placed one document on the table. She didn't slide it over. She simply rested her hand on top of it, almost like she wasn't sure I was ready to read it. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Before we continue, I need to ask you one question." I nodded. She looked directly into my eyes. "Did your father ever tell you about the Carter family trust?" I blinked. "The what?" Her expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to know that answer wasn't the one she'd expected. She opened the folder. Inside was a trust document dated just 11 months earlier. My father's signature was at the bottom, or at least it looked like his signature. The pages listed assets I recognized. The house, the lake cabin, his investment account, the life insurance policy. But one page was missing. Not torn. Removed, the page numbers skipped. 5, then 7. Someone had taken page 6. Sarah noticed it at the exact same moment I did. She slowly turned the folder toward herself again. Her face had gone pale. Then she whispered almost to herself, "That page should identify every beneficiary." The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds. But it felt endless. Because if page 6 was missing, someone had wanted exactly one thing hidden. The question was, who? Sarah closed the folder and took a slow breath. "I don't want to jump to conclusions," she said. "But I also don't want you making decisions without knowing what we've found." She explained that the trust had been submitted as supporting documentation for one of my father's accounts. Normally, the bank simply verifies the paperwork and moves on. Except this time, something didn't match. One document listed 2 beneficiaries. Another listed 3, no names. Just numbers, 3 equal shares. I felt my pulse quicken. My father only had 2 children. Sarah didn't correct me. She simply asked another question. Has anyone besides your brother had access to your father's personal files? I opened my mouth, then stopped, because I suddenly remembered something I'd dismissed at the time. The week before Dad died, Ryan had taken every filing cabinet out of Dad's home office. He told Mom he was organizing paperwork. None of us questioned it. Now I wished we had. I drove straight to Mom's house. Ryan's SUV was already in the driveway. He stepped onto the porch before I even reached the front steps, almost like he'd been watching through the window. You went to the bank. It wasn't a question. I looked at him. How did you know? He smiled, not warmly. Patiently. The bank called to verify some paperwork. Something about that answer bothered me immediately. Banks don't usually tell one beneficiary that another family member has shown up. So either Ryan was guessing, or someone inside had already spoken to him. Before I could ask another question, Mom opened the front door. She looked exhausted. I made coffee. Ryan immediately put a hand on her shoulder. Mom doesn't need more stress today. He answered for her. Again, inside the house, everything looked the same. Except Dad's office. The shelves were half empty. The filing cabinet drawers were gone. Even his old desk looked strangely clean. Too clean. My father never threw away paperwork. Birthday cards from 20 years ago? Still there. Old tax returns? Filed perfectly. Instruction manuals for appliances he no longer owned? Every single one. Yet now, the office looked staged, as though someone had erased an entire lifetime. I opened the bottom drawer. Empty. Second drawer. Empty, then I noticed something. A rectangle in the dust. Exactly the size of a lockbox. Whatever had been sitting there had been removed recently. Looking for something? Ryan was standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, perfectly calm. I asked him where Dad's lockbox was. Without hesitation, he replied, there wasn't one. That was impossible. I'd helped Dad install the safe shelf years earlier. Ryan knew that. He'd been there. For the first time, his confidence slipped. Only for a second. His eyes flicked toward the closet. Then back to me. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. That tiny glance told me 2 things. He was lying. And whatever mattered most was still somewhere inside this house. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every conversation from the past year. Every moment Ryan insisted on handling the paperwork alone. Every time he discouraged questions. Every document he signed before anyone else saw it. Then, just after midnight, my phone vibrated. An email notification. Sender, Sarah Whitmore. Subject, you need to see this before tomorrow. I opened the attachment. At first it looked like an ordinary bank statement. Then I noticed a transfer made 14 days before Dad died. A 6-figure amount. Moved into an account I'd never heard of. The account holder's name wasn't visible. But the first line beneath the transaction froze me in place. Authorized by R. Carter. I stared at the screen, hoping I was misunderstanding it. I wasn't, because tomorrow morning I was going to find out exactly who R. Carter really was. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that single line on the bank statement. Authorized by R. Carter. At 7:30 the next morning, I was sitting across from Sarah Whitmore again. She already had the statement spread across her desk. I've been trying to verify the transfer, she said. And? She hesitated. The receiving account doesn't belong to your father. My stomach dropped. Then whose is it? That's the problem. She slid another document toward me. The bank won't release the account holder's name without a court order. So we're stuck? Sarah shook her head. Not exactly. She reached into her portfolio. I found something else. She placed a photocopy of one of Dad's personal checks on the desk. It had never been cashed. The amount was only $500, but it wasn't the amount that caught my attention. It was the memo line. Dad always wrote notes there. This one simply read, "Safe deposit renewal." I frowned. My father didn't have a safe deposit box. Sarah looked up. "Are you sure?" I thought about it. Growing up, Dad always kept important papers in a small fireproof safe at home. Or at least, that's what I believed. Sarah pointed to the bank logo printed on the check. "It appears he rented one here. A safe deposit box. Ryan never mentioned it, not once." Within an hour, the bank manager escorted us downstairs, past a thick steel door, past rows of identical metal boxes. He stopped at one near the end of the hallway. "Box 317. He inserted the bank's master key, then looked at me. "Mr. Carter, I'll need your key." "I don't have one." His expression changed immediately. "There should be two." Sarah and I exchanged a look. The manager frowned. If one is missing, it means someone already has it. The bank records showed something else. The box had been accessed. Twice, the first visit, 6 months before Dad died. The second, 2 days after the funeral. I felt my chest tighten. "Who signed in?" "I'm sorry," the manager said. "I can't disclose that without authorization." Sarah leaned forward. What if the signer presented themselves as executor? The manager disappeared into another office. When he returned, he wasn't carrying paperwork. He was carrying a logbook. He opened it carefully, then turned it toward us. One signature. One date. One name. Ryan Carter. I stared at it. He'd opened the box 2 days after we buried Dad, and he'd never told anyone it existed. What was inside? The manager shook his head. "We don't inventory contents, so he could have taken anything." "Yes." Sarah quietly closed the logbook. "We need to know what your father kept in there." That question followed me all the way home. Then something hit me. When I was 16, Dad took me fishing. We spent hours sitting by the lake. Out of nowhere, he said something I'd forgotten until that moment. The things that matter most should never all be kept in one place. At the time, I thought he was talking about money. Maybe he wasn't. That afternoon, I drove to the lake cabin. Ryan thought the cabin had already been emptied. He'd said so himself. Still, something told me to look. Dust covered everything. The air smelled of old cedar and motor oil. I searched closets, kitchen drawers, bedroom cabinets. Nothing. I was about to leave when I noticed an old tackle box tucked beneath Dad's workbench. Inside, fishing lures, hooks, extra line. And beneath a false bottom, a small brass key. Wrapped in masking tape. Written across it, in Dad's handwriting. 317 backup. I just stood there. Staring. Dad knew. He knew one key could disappear. He'd hidden a second one. Back at the bank, the manager unlocked box 317 with the spare key. The metal drawer slid out slowly. It wasn't empty. Inside were 3 things: a faded leather journal, a sealed envelope, and a flash drive. Sarah carefully picked up the envelope. Across the front, written in Dad's unmistakable handwriting, "To Ethan, if something doesn't feel right." For several seconds, neither of us moved. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter. It began with 6 words that stopped me cold. If you're reading this, I was right. Dad wrote that he had become increasingly worried during the final year of his life. Not about his health, about Ryan. He never accused him directly, but he admitted something had changed. Money had become an obsession. Dad described finding unopened bills hidden in drawers. Investment statements moved to different folders, paperwork missing and then mysteriously reappearing. He ended the first page with a sentence that made my heart sink. "Trust isn't lost all at once, son. It's stolen a little at a time." I turned the page. But before I could read another word, Sarah suddenly reached across the table. Wait, she wasn't looking at the letter anymore. She was looking at the flash drive. It has a security seal. I frowned. So? She swallowed. Your father had this professionally archived. What does that mean? It means whatever is on this drive, he wanted to prove it couldn't be altered. At this point in the story, I'd spent days uncovering secrets my own family had kept buried. Every answer led to another question. Every document made the picture darker. So let me ask you something. What would you have done? Would you have confronted your brother the moment you found that letter? Or would you have stayed quiet, kept gathering evidence, and waited until there was no way he could explain it away? Let me know in the comments. Because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Sarah connected the flash drive to a secure office computer. The screen displayed just one folder. Personal recordings. Inside were 5 video files, each labeled with a date. The newest one had been recorded 9 days before Dad died. Sarah looked at me. You should decide if you want to watch this. I nodded. She clicked play. The screen faded in. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table. He looked tired, older than I remembered, but completely clear-minded. He looked straight into the camera, then said the one sentence I never imagined hearing. If Ryan tells you I changed my mind, don't believe him. The video began with Dad adjusting the camera. For a few seconds, he didn't speak. He just looked directly into the lens. There was something different about his expression. Not fear. Disappointment. The kind that only comes from someone you love. Finally, he took a slow breath. If you're watching this, Ethan, then something happened that I prayed never would. I felt my throat tighten. Dad glanced down at a notebook beside him before continuing. I don't know if this recording will ever be necessary. But if Ryan tells you I changed my mind, he paused. Then looked straight back into the camera. Don't believe him. The room fell completely silent. Even Sarah didn't move. Dad explained that about a year earlier, he had started noticing small things. At first, they seemed harmless. A bank statement arriving already opened. A credit card bill missing. A retirement account balance that didn't match what he'd expected. Whenever he asked Ryan about it, there was always an explanation. The bank made a mistake. The advisor already fixed it. I was just helping organize everything. Dad admitted he wanted to believe him. Because Ryan was his oldest son. And he'd always trusted him. But trust, he said, can make you ignore the questions you should be asking. Then Dad held up a familiar document. It was the Carter Family Trust. The same trust Sarah had shown me, except this copy had every page, including page 6. Sarah immediately paused the video. She compared the page numbers. There it was, the missing page, the one that had vanished from the trust submitted to the bank. Dad continued speaking. This page lists the beneficiaries exactly as I intended. 3 names. Not 2. Not because there was another child. Not because there was a secret family. The 3rd beneficiary was Mom. Everything was supposed to be divided equally between Margaret Carter, Ryan Carter, Ethan Carter. 33% each. I stared at the screen. Someone hadn't hidden another heir. Someone had hidden Mom. Sarah immediately understood the implication. If Margaret isn't listed, I finish the sentence. Her share goes somewhere else. Sarah nodded. Depending on how the altered trust is interpreted, yes. I looked back at the video. Dad wasn't finished. He reached into a folder and held up another document. This is why I hired an independent attorney. Not the attorney Ryan had introduced to the family. Someone else entirely. Dad explained that he'd become worried enough to create duplicate records. Duplicate trusts, duplicate letters, duplicate digital recordings, and he placed copies in different locations. One at home, one in the safe deposit box, one with his attorney. He wasn't trying to trap anyone. He was trying to protect everyone, especially Mom. Then came the sentence that explained everything. If this recording is needed, Then, someone removed documents after my death. I felt a chill run through me. Because that was exactly what had happened. Ryan hadn't just taken papers. He'd carefully removed one page. The only page that prevented him from controlling nearly everything. And suddenly, every decision he'd made over the last 3 days made sense. He insisted on organizing the office. He emptied the filing cabinets. He visited the safe deposit box after the funeral. He discouraged me from speaking with the bank. None of it was random. It had been a plan. Sarah didn't waste any time. She picked up her phone. I'm calling the probate court. Before she could dial, my own phone rang. Ryan. For a long moment, I just stared at his name. Then I answered. His voice sounded calm, almost cheerful. Hey, where are you? I looked at Sarah. Then back at the phone, at the bank. Silence, not even a breath. Then, what bank? He already knew. He just needed to know how much I knew. I answered with a question of my own. Why did you remove page 6? The silence on the other end lasted longer this time. When Ryan finally spoke, his voice had changed. You don't understand what Dad wanted. I asked him one more question. Did Dad want Mom removed from the trust? Ryan didn't answer. Instead, he said something I'll never forget. She wouldn't have known what to do with that money anyway. I looked at Sarah. She'd heard every word. That single sentence wasn't just cruel. It destroyed every explanation he could have offered. Because this wasn't about honoring Dad. It was about deciding who deserved the inheritance. And Ryan had appointed himself judge. Sarah quietly ended the call. She looked at me. I think we've heard enough. Within hours, the probate court issued an emergency order preventing any further movement of estate assets while the documents were examined. Ryan was ordered to surrender every original estate document in his possession. For the first time since Dad died, he couldn't control the paperwork. 3 weeks later, the hearing took place. Ryan arrived in an expensive navy suit. Confident, calm, almost annoyed that everyone had wasted his time. Then Sarah presented the evidence. The complete trust, the missing page, the bank access log, Dad's handwritten letter, the archived flash drive, the video recording, one by one, every piece fit together. Ryan's attorney tried to argue that page 6 had simply been misplaced, but the judge asked one question no one could answer. If the page was accidentally removed, why was it the only page missing from every altered copy? The courtroom became so quiet you could hear papers shifting. Ryan looked down. For the first time, he had nothing to say. The court declared the original trust valid. Mom's share was fully restored. The altered documents were rejected. The estate was redistributed exactly as Dad intended. Financially, everything was corrected. But emotionally, nothing could be. Because I wasn't mourning the money. I was mourning the brother I thought I'd had. A week later, Ryan came to my house. He stood on my porch holding a folder. I made mistakes. I waited. I was under pressure. I kept waiting. I thought I deserved more. There it was. Not I'm sorry, not I hurt Mom, not I betrayed you. Just, I deserved more. For the first time in my life, I realized he wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for another opportunity. I quietly handed him the folder he'd brought. I think you should keep this. He looked confused. Inside was a copy of Dad's letter, with one sentence highlighted. Trust isn't lost all at once. It's stolen a little at a time. I looked him in the eye, then said the hardest words I'd ever spoken. You didn't lose my trust today, Ryan. You spent years spending it. I stepped back, closed the door. And that was the last conversation we ever had. People sometimes ask if I regret cutting ties with my brother. The answer surprises them. I don't. Because forgiveness and reconciliation aren't the same thing. I chose to forgive the anger I was carrying, but I also chose to protect the peace I'd fought so hard to rebuild. Mom still lives in the same house. The lake cabin stayed in the family. Dad's journal sits on a shelf in my office. Every now and then I'll open it to a random page. Not because I'm looking for more answers, but because it reminds me of something he wrote near the very end. Character isn't measured by what people inherit. It's measured by what they're willing to sacrifice to keep their integrity. For a long time, I thought Dad left me an inheritance. Now I know he left me something far more valuable. The truth. And sometimes, the truth is the only inheritance worth fighting for. If you've ever uncovered a family secret that changed the way you saw someone forever, then you know why this story stayed with me. Because not every betrayal comes from a stranger. Sometimes, it comes from the person you've trusted your entire life. And next time, I'll tell you about another investigation that began with something that looked completely ordinary. A birthday card that arrived 6 months after the person who signed it had already passed away.